Hello and welcome to a very special How I Paint Things. Now yesterday I got my hands on a new camera and I decided I was going to test it by recording essentially live. And as any coder will tell you, never test in your live environment. And the goblin that I was painting, that video is completely unusable, it is corrupted, and I'm a little bit bummed out because he looked pretty cool. And I'm just going to sneak him in the side here. Hey, Goblin! So the Mantic Goblin video is coming, but I couldn't just do another one back to back. I don't have the moral fortitude to do it. So instead, I thought I'd go back to a classic and paint one of the new Escher. And I say new, but the last time I painted them, they were all in metal. Now the Escher miniatures have got quite a lot going on, so it can be a little bit daunting approaching them for the first time. But they are much the same as anything else, just start from the bottom and paint your way up as you go. So this one uses a few more paints than ordinarily, and there are one or two VALLEJO colors in the range here, so I will make sure that there are alternatives listed in the description too. But without any further mucking around, let's get started. Now I've started off by priming her with a spray of Barbarian Flesh from the Army Painter, which might seem like a strange choice. But the reason why I'm using this is because I want a little bit of peachiness and slightly more reddish warmth to the skin color at the bottom. Reason being, when we shade it later, the difference between Barbarian Flesh and something like Cadian Fleshtone. Cadian Fleshtone doesn't have as much red in it, so when we shade it, it's going to look a little pale and washed out. Versus Barbarian Flesh, which is designed specifically to take a brown shade over the top, so that'll work quite well. If you wanted to, you could as easily start from something like Wraithbone and apply a couple of coats of Cadian Fleshtone, just do things slightly differently later on, but this is where I'm going to begin. So because we want to avoid most of that skin, what I'm going to do is start painting the next layer up, and in the case of most of these Escher miniatures, that's going to be the jeans or the bodysuit. Now it has been asked a couple of times how I would paint jeans, and the short answer, this is VALLEJO Luftwaffe uniform. Now this is a wonderful grey blue. It's kind of similar to Dark Reaper if you want to stick to Citadel colors, but it is a little bit more grey and not quite as dark. So for denim, this is a really good starting point. One of the reassuring things about Luftwaffe uniform is that it does dry a little darker than it looks while going on. Now, we're going to move on to the sort of black leather parts, and there is quite a bit of this on the miniature. Now, if you're wanting to stick to Citadel products, you can use Corvus Black here, but I have mentioned German Grey a few times on the channel, and I think you'll see why. As exactly the same reason as our Luftwaffe uniform, this stuff just covers. So this is going to give us a just off black that once it is shaded is going to have a little bit of depth and will be a little bit easier to make look cool. That's not the best explanation ever, but trust me on this. As well, gauntlets and stuff like that, it is up to you what parts you want to do this black leather. Now honestly, I have probably put on more of that than most folks would. Particularly up around the collar and what have you, I tend to see this done in the same color as the armor. It's up to you. I honestly just prefer a darker finish to my Escher, so I have done more of that leather, and I'm going to skimp on some of the yellow later on. What I've got now, this is Burnt Umber, again another VALLEJO color, but you could stick to Thondia Brown, again if you want to use Citadel stuff. So any brown leather straps, a little bit of Burnt Umber now, still trying to avoid those areas that are going to be yellow later on. Now again, the where and how much of that is really up to you. But that is the last of the really dull bits done. Now we get to paint something really bright, and for this I have Yriel Yellow. And I think you're going to see here why we'd start from a skin tone base, because this is going to work super well to give us a nice bright yellow very quickly. So it's a quick pass. It's probably going to need a second coat just to give me a solid color, but at least it's not 9 coats like you'll get in some cases where you're trying to paint yellow. So I'm going to paint those armor plates there. I'm going to paint, these back plates and her shoulder pad, I'm going to paint in yellow. And then I think for the little dangly tabard thing she's wearing, I'm going to paint that a different yellow. But for now, let's just lay down all of the hard stuff. So all of the armor pads she's wearing. Now for yellow, that is shockingly easy. There was 2 coats in most of those areas. Only 1 on the shoulder pads, to be perfectly honest. It's up to you whether or not you do need to go over that again. Like, you'll have the miniature in front of you and you can make that choice. But man, that beats doing 12 coats. It's so much better. But I did mention that I wanted to paint the tabard thing in a slightly different yellow. So for this, I'm going to use Ungor Flesh. And this is one which I say all the time, you're not likely to have it unless you need it for something, but it is such a useful colour. So let's bap on a couple of coats of that. Now that won't take long, and then it's up to you what you want to do with the hair. A variety of different hair colours usually looks pretty cool. You'll probably see me lurking with the orange back there. Blue and green are good complementary colours if you want to go against the yellow. But I'm going to lean into it a little with a warm colour. And I have Fire Dragon Bright, which, oh my goodness, that is an understatement. Bright is not the word. So I'm going to apply a couple of coats of this to her hair. What I'm going to do as well is water this down just a little more until it's almost the consistency of an ink or a wash, and just put a little bit of it over this section of her head, because I do not like how these haircut sections fit on the heads. They never quite line up right, but a little bit of hair color will help disguise them as though it's an undercut. Man, that's bright. It does give me ideas about what I want to do with this little bit of dangling cloth there, though. I think I'll do that in red and sort of lean into the warm tones. Anyhow, we're going to paint in the metallic stuff now, and there is quite a bit of this. So I have Leadbelcher, and you'll see it covers fairly well, but over large areas like on her gun or on the flat of her blade, you're probably going to need to come back and give it a second coat. So cruise around pretty much all of the little dealy boppers she's carrying too. Those will benefit from a bit of metal work now. If I could keep a point on my brush, gosh. And yeah, let's come back and have a look at what that looks like once all that's applied. Alright, I changed my mind. That's the boring bit. My goodness, that takes some doing. It is still just 1 coat, but you've got to be so careful in order to save yourself time in the long run. So, yeah. Anyhow, I have now Orruk Flesh, which is one of the new base colours. It's a really light green. It's really quite pleasant. I'm going to use this to paint in the hose on her little... I don't know what this is, but it's going to be green. And I'm also going to paint in the feather lurking on her equipment over here. Now I've got some Temple Guard blue, and this is really a very light turquoise. It's a wonderful colour. I'm going to use this to pick out a few of the little gemstone areas. You could also use Calgar blue or, anything really. I've just chosen this because I want something now that will go with the yellow a little bit. And at this stage you can really start going crazy with some of the colours you add. And then I'm going to use some Evil Sunz Scarlet for a few tiny red details. So I'm going to do in the little gems on her blade here. And I'll also paint in the that cloth I mentioned earlier. Now's the perfect time to do this, a nice bright red. Now in the optional but kinda cool stage, I have some Retributor Armour. And this is going to end up a little more brassy and kind of bronze by the time we're finished. But I'm going to pick out just a couple of small details. Now for a little bit of balance, as well as her sword, I've just done a wee bit of it around this canister doohickey. What we'll move on to finally is a little bit of Ushabti Bone, and I'm going to use this to paint in, well, some of them are wearing these little bone or tooth charms. A quick coat of this will do the job for these. As well, there's a little bit of what looks like cord or something holding on the feather here, and I'm just going to paint that in with Ushabti Bone as well. Now once you've got those last couple of base coats on, it's time to do any last cleanup that you need to, so just make sure everything is where you want it to be, then give your Agrax Earthshade a really good shake. We're going to apply this over the entire miniature. And yeah, same as always, we're really going to make sure to work this into the recesses. And then we'll give this bad boy about 30 minutes to dry. So once your shade is dried, you're going to have something that looks like this. And she's pretty much finished. Like at this stage, you could just finish off her base and put her on the table. But everything did go pretty much according to plan, so her skin is a little grubbier than I might like. So what I'm doing is I have some Cadian Fleshtone, and I'm going to apply a little of this just to flatten out some of the areas of her skin and add a bit more definition to that again. And once you're satisfied with that, I've got a little bit of Kislev Flesh, and I have watered this down slightly more than I normally would. So for comparison's sake, let's just, you see I'm leaving a little bit of translucency there. So what we're going to do with this is now highlight the skin, dare I say properly, by picking out a few areas of musculature, like abs are always a good place to start with this, and just a little bit of this to define some of those edges. This is way easier without a camera in the way. Particularly up on her face too, I'm going to thin that out just a little bit more because I want to paint in her cheekbones, but I don't want a really sharply defined line. So with my thin paint, I'm going to start at the back of her face and draw the line up towards the cheek, and then as I lift my brush away, you'll see a little bit more of that wet paint collects there. So I'm going to do that to the other cheek and a few other spots on her face. Now, as well as the face, a little bit of that on her arms and such, that'll really help with the musculature there too. You don't need to do much of it, but a little bit will really help. So I'm going to go back to my Ushabti Bone from earlier, and I'm going to use this to highlight just a little of the yellow. I actually quite like this grungy, dirty yellow that we get with the Agrax Earthshade. So I'm not going to do a huge amount of this. And to my mind, doing yellow with like a bone highlight usually looks a little more crisp than by using a lighter yellow. That can look a little more kind of faded. So this is how I like to do it. Now the cool thing with Ushabti Bone is you can also use it to highlight the tabard thing. So bone is there, looks really cool, and is quick to do. Now there are a couple of details that I am going to kind of cheat by doing off camera, but I do want to introduce, and that is to use Screamer Pink first of all to paint in her tongue. Now you can use a red or something, like I said, I'm going to do this off camera, but I tend to find at this level of painting that Screamer Pink will look more natural than a bright red. And then we'll add in just a little bit of white scar to do her teeth. And likewise, I'm going to do this off camera. At this point, you could also paint in her eyes. I'm not going to because I don't... It's so much extra work for a miniature that's going to be at arm's length the whole time. I'm not painting for display. When it comes to highlighting her black leather, we're actually going to go back to Luftwaffe Blue. So anywhere that there is going to be a hard edge, particularly where these areas are folded back, a little bit of this blue helps with that blue-black finish, and it will dry looking differently to the blue right next to it that we've shaded. And then to highlight the blue, we're going to use Field Blue, which is another VALLEJO color. Now there isn't really a direct sort of alternative to this in the Citadel range. So if you're using Dark Reaper for these jeans, then what I'd suggest would be to add in a little bit of Administratum Grey, mix it up and highlight it with that. Now when it comes time to do her hair, for the orange, I'm going to use Kindleflame. Very light dry brush of this, just pass over it a few times until you pick up some of the leading detail. Obviously, if you were doing this for a bunch of different colors, you don't necessarily want to be picking up 8 or 9 different dry brush colors, but you can also mix a little bit of white into your base color and dry brush with that. It will take a little bit of practice when compared to using a dry paint, but, you know, we used to dry brush without dry paints all the time. That was just how it was done, so have a bit of a practice. Now finally, with some Screamer Pink, mixed with about 3 parts water to 1 part pink, whispering very carefully to myself the whole time, I'm going to go over her bottom lip a couple of times. If you just paint straight color, whether it's red or purple or whatever, it's not going to look great. It's not going to match the rest of the skin tone very well. But by watering it down and adding just a couple of gradual layers, you get a much more natural pink-looking bottom lip. Now from this point on, I'm sure you can see there are a bunch of extra things you could do. You could highlight the gems, you could highlight the metal, it's really up to you. I think there comes a point though when you're painting for visual impact on the table. I could spend forever painting this figure. It's been fun, it's been really satisfying, but there does have to be a point where you stop. And sometimes that's the real difficult skill. So what I'm going to do is take her outside, hit her with a matte varnish, and then we'll get a look at what she looks like when she is all complete. And there at last, our Escher Ganger is complete. Now like I said, there is plenty more that you could do, but looking to strike a balance between grimy and finished and done quickly, I think this is a pretty good compromise between all of those things. Obviously when it comes to hair colours, Escher are one of those gangs where you're probably going to end up with a lot more paints in your collection than you might have expected going in, but they will look really cool as a result when they're finished. So thank you very much to Exit 23 Games for the light and sound equipment, as well as all of the patrons who are keeping me ticking in paints and glue, including my producers, Alan Nuttall, Kyrie Crawford, Trainboy, Fred, and Jimmy. Your support really is invaluable. Any questions or anything, feel free, drop them in the old comments box below. My Twitter and Instagram are both linked there too. So thank you very much for your time one and all, and you all enjoy the rest of your day.